Well, it's easy to look in the rearview mirror and criticize the actions that have taken place on both the state and the local levels. But, in reality, we've been responding to something that we've never before seen in our lifetimes. In the end, I think as a legislator, I would have been more comfortable being a little bit more involved with some of the decisions made at the executive level in the state. But, after all, my businesses are open, my kids are in school. I've been able to go watch my daughter play basketball. And ultimately, we did protect those in our family that are most vulnerable. But I believe that we need to, and I think we will, examine the emergency declaration process in this next legislative session. And I think what we need to do is make sure that any decisions made during an emergency or pandemic, that those decisions are reviewable, they're changeable, and that people are held accountable. Because I think while we've made some good and bad decisions, some of these decisions are made with absolutely no accountability or review, and we need to have a check and balance system. A lot of the CARES Act money has come into the state, and the legislature is the appropriations body of government, and we've had no say in how those funds are being used. I don't think at the local level with some of the, I look at the attendance at sporting events and some of the decisions that's been made there, which there are outdoor events where you can social distance and you can have controls in place, but then they'll come up with some random, one person can come per player, nobody can attend. These are decisions that don't have a lot of science behind them. And I wish that there was a way that we could make sure that people were held accountable and that we could change those decisions when they needed to be changed. I don't have an issue with mail-in ballots that are requested by a qualified elector, and those are called absentee ballots. I prefer to vote via mail, and I've always requested to vote as an absentee voter. The difference now, though, is that with this new system, everyone gets a mail-in ballot, whether they request it or not. I think our election folks do a great job, but the more unsolicited ballots that you have out there being sent out, I think can just cause additional issues. And ultimately, our election system has got to be as fair and secure as possible. And I really think even in this time of pandemic, we surely could have allowed people to vote in person if that's what they chose to do, with protective measures like social distancing in place. And also, if somebody felt like they were unsure about it and wanted to vote absentee ballot, they could have requested an absentee ballot, just like we've done in every other election. So I think we could have stuck with the way we had, and I think a lot of folks would have wanted absentee ballots, but sending unsolicited ballots out is always a scary thing, because you just don't know who's getting them, who's turning them in, and any chance for any issues with the election system, I think we have to avoid. I would never support a sales tax, neither as a new tax or as a replacement tax for something like property taxes. And the real issue, bottom line, is you can't trust government. Our Constitution says that one legislature cannot bind another legislature. And so this means that we could go into session here in January, we could implement a sales tax, let's say a very low rate, and then we could reduce property taxes to offset for that. And that'd be maybe a great thing. But the legislatures that would be seated down the road would have no responsibility to stay with those levels. It's very, very likely that a legislature down the road, when we'd be in some situation, economic downturn or whatever it might be, would say, well, let's just raise that sales tax a little bit, or let's reinstitute the property taxes that we had gotten rid of. That is not only likely to happen, I think that probably would happen. I always use the example, I've lived some years in Washington, and that's exactly what happened in King County, Washington, where they implemented a sales tax to offset other taxes at a very low rate and said this will never change. I think it was some like 0.2% or something, and now it's well over 10%. So you just can't trust government. Our Constitution says we can't bind future legislatures. It's not something that I would have any interest in doing. I'm a businessman, and I rely every day on the ability of great employees. I'm also the father of 3 young girls. Knowing that, there's just no way that I could support marijuana in any aspect of our lives. And I get the allure of a lot of dollars coming into the state coffers, which would do a lot of good and would help a lot of people. But it's the intangible costs that worry me. And we're seeing some of those things in other states that have implemented recreational marijuana. Drug use leads to child abuse, to crime increases, to more addiction, to reduced business efficiencies, less reliable employees, families destroyed, suicide rate increases. These are things that come along with drug use, and the list just goes on and on and on. And I think when we look at, you can look at one side, which is the revenue, but you always have to look at both sides of the equation. The other side is cost, and the cost to Montana families and businesses and our people is just too high. So no, I can't support it. Well, I think we came up with, and I support and authored a really good solution in Montana for the ACA, and it's called the HELP Act. And last session, we did a little bit more reform to it, and that was called the Maria Act. But what we came up with was an extremely innovative solution. We were the first guys to do it, and it's been copied a lot now. But what we did is we provided a link between economic development and healthcare. And the idea is how can someone be successful in a job and successfully provide for themselves and their family if they're unhealthy, either mentally or physically, or if they're addicted to some sort of drug. You just can't do it. So, we came up with a great solution in Montana using what I view as a very badly and poorly written federal law, and the ACA needs to be fixed. But our program that we implemented saved the taxpayers of Montana over $55 million in the current biennium, and probably over the past few years has saved a few of those rural hospitals that so many of our people rely on. So I do think that we're going to see changes from the Fed, and I hope we do, that are going to give states more control with their healthcare programs, because a one-size solution, which is out there now, just doesn't ever work, not in a nation this large. So with more state control, I think we can take what is a really good program that we did here in Montana, and we can make it even better. But it is ultimately, at the end of the day, states need to make the best decisions for their own citizenry, and I look forward to the point where we'll get more control. By far, the biggest issues are around the COVID-19 pandemic. And everyone, including myself, we want to get our lives back. We want to work when we need to work. We want to play. We want to watch sports. We want to travel. Really miss traveling, and we just want to live our lives. So people call me quite often and say, what is our government doing about the pandemic? When is the shutdown and the pandemic going to end? Tough questions. But they also ask from a legislative perspective, what's going to happen with the state budget? And that's also hard to answer. We were really smart in the last few sessions, and due to our fiscal prudence, we did implement a rainy day and surplus savings because we thought that we might be going into another economic downturn. We certainly are in this pandemic. So that was really good of us to do. And those monies we saved are going to get us through the current biennium and fund all of our programs. And that's great. But the next biennium and the next few years are going to be a real struggle. We have a huge hole in our revenue coming into the state, and we're going to have to figure out how to address that. And unfortunately, when these folks call, I don't have answers to all these tough questions, but I do have the ability and desire to do whatever it's going to take so that we can come up with the best plans, solutions, policy, and budgeting to minimize the impacts to as many Montanans as we can and to help the most people. So I think that this next session is going to be a challenge. It's going to be all about the budget. I think we need to make sure that we send the best and most able lawmakers to Helena, because we're going to have 90 days to fill a very large revenue gap and to get the state back on track. It's going to be challenging. I think I've got the experience and ability to represent the voters. I've tried to always do a really good job to represent everyone in my district, regardless of their political affiliation, because that's my job. But I think that, I've got conservative ideals. I believe pretty much the same thing as other Republicans, but I'm also realistic in that we've got to find a way to help people. We've got to move the ball down the field. Every play is not going to be a touchdown. And I have had a lot of luck in coming up with what I thought were really good ideas, and then talking with people with opposing viewpoints, including members of the other party, and finding ways to make something even much better. And so I'm willing to listen. I don't think by any means that every solution I come up with is the best before you talk to the people that it affects and you talk to folks on all sides. And I'm willing to do that. And I'm willing to work as hard as possible to make sure we, especially in this next session, that we get out of this hole and we get back to life as normal as we can. So, I'm willing and able to work hard. I'm experienced. I know how the budget process works and how the policy and the legislature works. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help our folks.